And then along came lone actors who claimed to be terrorists. Hassan. Goes to college, does a science degree, joins the army. Well, he joined the student army beforehand, or whatever they call themselves. The army paid for him to go to medical school, train him, gets a medical degree, decides to become a psychiatrist. The army supports his psychiatric training. He wasn't particularly good psychiatric. I mean, it's one thing that I could get hold of was his reports. I mean, he was reported to be odd, isolated, not good at relating to people, including patients, which is fine if you're a surgeon, but, you know, in psychiatry, you at least ought to be able to get on nodding terms with your patient. You know, you don't have to get all warm and fuzzy and sort of grip, feel a lot about them, but, you know, at least be polite, but he wasn't even polite. So he wasn't very good with his patients, but nonetheless, he did all right. He came in the Army Medical Corps as a psychiatrist, rose to the rank of major. Interestingly, totally isolated. Very difficult to be an army officer and isolated. Very, very difficult. He didn't live on camp. He could have had a nice 4-bedroom house on camp. He lived in a grotty room, a fair way away from the camp. Didn't socialise with anyone. Went to the local mosque, but was considered odd. Didn't socialise with the others. Wasn't particularly regular. He then got into conflict with the army, and at some stage decides that everyone is against him, which he thought for a long while, that he's being persecuted, that they're trying to destroy him, destroy his career, and that he gets increasingly identifies with ISIS. He begins to have a correspondence with various radical clerics, which the army finds out about, and he says, well, I thought I might be useful, to you as an expert on terrorism. And they buy this. They're actually thinking of moving across to the intelligence division so that he can give them advice and help. But he cuts that short by taking a gun and shooting 13 servicemen dead and injuring another 32. He then attempts to kill himself, but he couldn't even manage that. Okay. And he says, I am a martyr for the cause. Okay. Breivik. Special. We know a lot about Breivik, that the Norwegians publicly tried him is outrageous. It was a terrible mistake. But it's the sort of mistake, I mean, they're terminally decent Norwegians. They can't really get their head round people who are not. I'm married to one. Oh, Jesus. I mean, the world just, you can't be Pollyanna all the fucking time. Well, you can. Trust me, you can. But, whether this is, they should never have been given an opportunity to spout his nonsense for days on end. But the only positive thing is that everything went into court, so you've got access to the lot. You've got actually recordings of every psychiatric examination. And there are a number of them by 4 different psychiatrists, 3 psychologists, okay? Plus all the interviews with other people. You've got the whole lot. So we know, if you want to, you know a lot about Breivik. And he fits absolutely into this pattern. I won't bother to go through it all again, but he does. Okay. Lone actor terrorists have formed into a largely disregarded group among terrorists, perhaps most common among assassins and would-be assassins. Radicalised by books, internet, personal experience, and sometimes psychotic convictions, not by socialisation into a militant organisation. Well, we don't really care about that. Alternative definitions, etc. Yeah, Eric Holder, the thing that I think keeps me up most at night is this concern about the lone wolf who goes undetected. Okay. It's the lone wolf strategy that I think we have to pay attention to as the main threat to this country. Okay. Okay. Let's have a little look at a model. Socially isolated and self-absorbed man, young man. Sense of personal grievance is often justified to some extent. The experience of the self as a powerless victim, very important. acquire an identification with those seen as similarly victimised through reading, internet or TV, adopt an ideology, theology, which links them to fellow victims and offers vicarious vindication through their struggle, the desire for revenge against an uncaring world which has ignored their superiority. They're all convinced of their superiority, of course, just like the other lot. Final stressful precipitant, they aim to achieve fame and vindication in death, and it's an acceptable form of suicide. Okay, let's get to the meat of it. Here's a book, one of the books on lone wolf terrorism, often quoted, can't think why. One of the quotes is, "We tried to differentiate terrorists from violent lunatics. Crazies, by definition, could not be terrorists. Why not? Because they can't plan, of course. They can't think ahead." I mean, this passes for an academic book. Here's Paul Gill, one of the better researchers in the area. 41% of lone terrorists had a history of mental health problems. What they actually had a history of was contact with the mental health services. 41% had prior contact with the mental health services. Members of terrorist groups have a low rate of mental illness, as I've said. It's politically and that was just assumed to apply also to lone actors, which it doesn't. It's politically unacceptable, seen in the USA as sympathising with the terrorists or letting them evade responsibility. The Francisco Martin Duran case, the US attorney Eric Holder said, "Very often in society, people try to excuse, to deflect responsibility." He was a lone actor terrorist, he had schizophrenia. Assumptions that being mentally ill negates the ability to plan and carry through complex attacks. Quite wrong. We did a big study here on 460 consecutive homicides. And when we compared the psychotics to the non-psychotics, the psychotics were much more likely to have planned and prepared the attack. The non-psychotics, who by and large got overwhelmed by emotion and suddenly lost their temper and started bashing and beating someone, usually their partner or child or something. So in fact, far from being incompatible, it's actually more likely that a psychotic individual will plan a violent and murderous attack. Quite interesting. If you look at the Paul Gill's database, you've got 34% who are Muslim extremists. You've got right-wing inspired, 39%. Single issue, largely abortion, 27%. Okay. So, lone actors are 13 times more likely to have a mental illness. That's psychotic than group terrorists. It's actually higher than that. Amongst lone actors, those with mental illness history are more likely to carry out a violent attack rather than not violent, choose an indiscriminate target, kill, injure, and publicly claim responsibility. He compared lone actor terrorists and mass casualty shooters, i.e. those with no political motive claimed. There's very, very few differences. They're the same people, just giving a different reason in their manifestos that they leave behind.